It was past midnight when James Turner steered his old Honda Civic onto the stretch of highway that cut across the rural outskirts of Willow Springs. The road ahead stretched endlessly, swallowed by the mist that rose from the damp fields on either side. His headlights carved two pale tunnels of light through the darkness, but beyond that, the world seemed empty, as though he were the last man alive. James adjusted his grip on the wheel, trying to fight off the fatigue pulling at his eyelids. He'd been driving for nearly 4 hours after leaving a late study session at the university library. Home was still another hour away, but the silence of the night pressed in on him, making every minute feel longer. He turned on the radio, hoping to catch a late-night station, but all he got was static. With a sigh, he switched it off again. That was when he saw her. At first, it was only a shape in the fog. A faint outline at the edge of the road. James slowed instinctively, leaning forward in his seat. The figure resolved into a young woman, standing on the shoulder of the highway, her thumb stuck out in the universal gesture for a ride. James' pulse quickened. It was unusual, unnerving even, to see someone out here at this hour. The road was lonely, far from any houses or gas stations. But as his headlights washed over her, he could see she looked harmless enough. She was slender, with long dark hair that gleamed faintly in the beams. She wore a pale coat, buttoned up to the neck, and clutched a small handbag. He slowed to a stop, rolling down the passenger window. "Hey," James called, his voice uncertain. "You need a ride?" The woman stepped closer, and he caught a clearer look at her face. She was young, perhaps his age, early 20s, with delicate features and wide, searching eyes. There was something old-fashioned about her appearance, though. Her coat looked vintage, and her hairstyle reminded him of photos of his mother from the 1970s. "Yes, please," she said softly. Her voice was clear but quiet, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. "If you don't mind." James hesitated for only a moment before unlocking the door. She slid into the seat beside him, smoothing her coat as she did. A faint chill followed her in, though the heater was on. "Where are you headed?" James asked, pulling back onto the road. She gave him a small, polite smile. "Not far. Just down by Willow Creek Road. There's a house there." James nodded, though he couldn't recall seeing any houses along Willow Creek. Still he shrugged it off. They drove in silence for a few moments. James kept glancing at her from the corner of his eye. There was something unusual about her. Not threatening, exactly, but strange. Her hands, resting in her lap, were pale and slender, almost too pale, as though they hadn't seen sunlight in years. And her eyes, though kind, had a depth that unsettled him, like someone carrying 1,000 untold stories. Finally, to break the silence, he said, "What were you doing out here? It's a bad night to be walking alone." The young woman tilted her head slightly, looking out at the dark road ahead. "I was waiting, hoping someone would come by." She glanced back at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "And you did." James chuckled nervously. "Lucky timing, I guess." She studied him for a moment before replying, "Perhaps it was meant to be." Her words lingered in the air, heavier than they should have been. James shifted in his seat, suddenly aware of how empty the road was, how the fog seemed to swallow sound itself. After another stretch of silence, she spoke again, almost as if to herself. "People don't stop anymore. They drive past. They're afraid." James cleared his throat. "What? You don't seem dangerous." Her eyes flickered toward him, a glint of amusement, or was it sadness, in them? "Not anymore." James frowned. "What do you mean?" But she only turned back to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. The minutes ticked by. James couldn't help but feel a growing unease, though he didn't know why. The girl seemed calm, polite, almost shy. And yet, there was an otherworldly stillness about her, as though she were both present and distant at once. At last, she broke the silence again. "Would you like to hear a story?" James blinked, surprised by the sudden question. "A story?" She nodded slowly. "Just a story about this road. About why people don't stop anymore." Despite the unease creeping up his spine, James found himself nodding. "Sure. Why not?" The girl folded her hands neatly in her lap, her voice soft and measured as she began. They say, many years ago, a young woman was walking this road. She'd been at a party, dressed in her best coat, her best shoes. But she never made it home. Some say she was struck by a car. Others say something darker took her that night. But one thing is certain, she still waits here, hoping for a ride. James let out a nervous laugh. Sounds like an urban legend. The girl's lips curved into a smile, but her eyes remained distant. Perhaps. But sometimes legends are truer than they seem. A chill trickled down James' spine. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, suddenly aware of the hum of the engine, the emptiness of the night, and the quiet presence of the woman beside him. The fog thickened, swallowing the road ahead. And in that moment, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer driving alone, that whatever he had invited into his car was more than just a stranded traveler. The road wound ahead like a dark ribbon, vanishing into the fog. James tried to focus on the white dashed lines flashing beneath his headlights, but his eyes kept flicking sideways to the girl in the passenger seat. She sat so still, so composed, with her hands folded neatly on her lap, as though she were a guest in a stranger's house rather than a stranded hitchhiker. Finally, James broke the silence. So, were you coming from somewhere? A party? You're kind of dressed up for walking on the side of the highway. The girl tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into that faint, enigmatic smile. You could say that. The party, long ago. I was on my way home. James raised an eyebrow. A long time ago? What do you mean? Her eyes drifted toward the fog outside the window. Sometimes the past feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. James let out a small laugh, though it sounded nervous even to his own ears. That's pretty vague. She didn't reply. Instead, she reached up and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. James noticed, with a strange shiver, that her fingers looked almost translucent in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Pale and delicate, like porcelain. He cleared his throat. Well, my name's James, by the way. The girl turned her head toward him, her eyes studying his face as though searching for something deeper. After a long pause, she said softly, Emily. Nice to meet you, Emily, James said, forcing a smile. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she turned back to the road ahead. It's nice to meet you too, James. The sound of his name on her lips sent a ripple through him. It was too personal, too intimate, for someone he'd only just met. Trying to shake off the unease, James asked, So, you live near Willow Creek? I don't remember seeing many houses out that way. Yes, she said, her tone quiet, almost wistful. My home is there. A white house at the edge of the woods. You can't miss it. James frowned. He'd driven past Willow Creek countless times, and he was certain there wasn't any white house near the woods. But he kept that thought to himself. Instead, he asked, Do you, live with your family? Emily's smile faltered. Her eyes lowered to her lap. I used to. A long time ago. But not anymore. Something in her voice, so soft, so sad, sent a shiver crawling up James' arms. He glanced at her again, then quickly back to the road. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up anything painful. Emily looked at him then, her dark eyes catching the glow of the dashboard lights. For just a moment, James swore he saw something in them. Something deep, endless, almost like grief frozen in time. But then she smiled again, faint and polite. It's all right. Pain fades, eventually. Doesn't it? James hesitated. Sometimes, he admitted. Silence filled the car once more, broken only by the hum of the engine and the steady thrum of tires on asphalt. After a long stretch of road, Emily spoke again. You said earlier that legends sound like stories. But stories often hold truths we can't explain. James chuckled nervously. Like ghost stories? Her lips curved. Just like ghost stories. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't the type to scare easily, but there was something about the way she said it, so calm, so matter-of-fact, that made his skin prickle. Do you believe in that kind of thing? He asked, keeping his tone light. Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pressed her palm gently against the cold glass of the passenger window, staring out into the fog. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft it was almost a whisper. "I don't have to believe," she said. "I already know." The words hung in the air like a chill draft. James forced a laugh. "Well, that's ominous." Emily turned her head then, her eyes fixing on him with unsettling intensity. "Have you ever wondered," she asked quietly, "what it feels like to be forgotten? To vanish one night, and no one ever knows what happened to you?" James swallowed hard. "I can't say I have." Her gaze lingered for another moment, then softened. She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes briefly as though resting. The silence stretched again, but James' mind churned. Something about this whole encounter was wrong. The girl, the way she spoke, the strange chill that seemed to radiate from her, it all felt off, like a puzzle with missing pieces. Yet at the same time he felt drawn to her. There was a fragility about her, a sadness that tugged at him. To break the tension he asked, "So, what's your story, Emily?" "Everyone's got one. You've got this mysterious vibe, like there's something you're not saying." Her eyes fluttered open, and she smiled faintly. "My story is simple. I went to a party one night. I laughed, I danced, I felt alive. Then I walked home. I never made it there." James' hands tightened on the wheel. "What do you mean you never made it?" Her gaze drifted back to the road ahead, her voice distant, almost detached. "That was the night everything ended. And yet, I still walk, still wait, hoping someone will take me home." The words hit James like a cold splash of water. He laughed nervously, trying to mask his unease. "Okay, wow. You're really leaning into this whole spooky hitchhiker story, huh?" But Emily didn't laugh. She just kept staring ahead, her expression unreadable. The fog thickened, wrapping the car in a cocoon of mist. The world outside the headlights was nothing but darkness and white haze. James felt his heart pounding harder, a growing dread pressing in on him. Emily's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "Do you believe me, James?" James forced himself to smile, though his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Believe you about what?" "That I never made it home." The car seemed colder now, the air heavier. James glanced at her quickly, but her face was turned toward the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. He wanted to laugh it off, to chalk it up to some weird, dramatic storytelling. But deep down in the pit of his stomach he felt the icy weight of something else. Something he couldn't explain. And though he didn't want to admit it, part of him already knew the truth. The car hummed steadily through the fog, the rhythmic sound of the tires on asphalt the only comfort James could cling to. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 12:41 a.m. The night seemed endless, each mile stretching longer than the last. Emily sat quietly beside him, her hands folded once more, her pale face illuminated in fleeting intervals by the glow of passing road signs. James tried to tell himself she was just an ordinary girl, strange, maybe eccentric, but ordinary. Yet every time he looked at her, something in his gut told him otherwise. Finally, a weather-beaten wooden sign appeared through the haze, "Willow Creek, 2 miles." James exhaled, relieved. "Almost there," he said, more to himself than to her. Emily stirred, her eyes fixing on the sign as it faded into the fog behind them. "Yes," she murmured. "Almost." Her tone was unreadable, carrying a weight that pressed on James' chest. He tightened his grip on the wheel. The road narrowed as they drew closer to the outskirts of Willow Creek. The streetlights became sparse, the darkness between them deep and suffocating. The woods loomed closer on either side, tall trees reaching up like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. Emily leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the roadside. "Turn left up ahead," she said softly. James frowned. "Left? I thought the main town was straight ahead." "It is," she replied. "But my house isn't in town. It's by the woods. You'll see it." James hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this was a bad idea. But he forced himself to nod. "All right." Sure enough, a narrow dirt road appeared on the left, barely visible in the fog. James slowed the car and turned onto it. The tires crunched over gravel, and the headlights illuminated rows of towering trees pressing close on either side. The deeper they drove, the colder the air seemed to grow. James shivered, turning up the heater, but it did little to chase away the chill. Emily spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. "It's just a little further." James nodded, his throat dry. The road wound deeper into the forest, the trees so thick now that the fog seemed trapped between them. His headlights cut through the mist, revealing nothing but endless trunks and branches. And then suddenly it appeared. A white house. It stood at the edge of a clearing, its paint weathered and peeling, its windows dark and hollow like empty eyes. The porch sagged slightly, and the front steps were worn and broken. The house looked as though it hadn't been lived in for decades. James slowed the car to a stop, his heart thudding in his chest. "This is your house?" Emily's face lit with a strange, serene smile. "This home." James stared at the house, a knot forming in his stomach. "Emily, this place looks abandoned." She turned to him then, her expression calm, almost peaceful. "Not abandoned. Just forgotten." Her words sent a chill racing down James' spine. For a long moment, he sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel. The fog swirled around the car, the woods pressing in like silent witnesses. Finally, Emily spoke again, her tone gentle. "Thank you for bringing me here, James. Not everyone stops. Not everyone listens." James forced a shaky laugh. "Yeah, well, I guess I'm just that kind of guy." Emily smiled softly. "You're kind. That's rare." She reached for the door handle. James watched, his pulse quickening as she pushed the door open. The interior light flickered on, casting a pale glow over her face. She stepped out slowly, her white dress fluttering in the cold night air. For a moment, she stood there, gazing at the house as though it were a long-lost friend. James leaned toward the open window. "Are you sure you'll be all right? This place doesn't look safe." Emily turned back to him, her dark eyes meeting his. "I'll be fine. This is where I belong." James frowned. "Do you want me to walk you to the door?" Her smile widened slightly. "No. You've done enough. More than enough." She paused then, her expression softening into something almost sorrowful. "But before you go, promise me something." James hesitated. "What kind of promise?" Her voice lowered, each word deliberate. "Promise me you won't forget tonight. Don't forget me." The word struck him like a blow. He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "I do promise." Emily's smile returned, faint and wistful. She stepped back, closing the car door gently. James watched as she walked toward the house, her figure ghostly in the fog. She moved with an odd grace, almost gliding across the ground. Halfway to the porch, she stopped and turned back one last time. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a fleeting moment, James thought he saw tears shimmering in her eyes. Then she turned again, stepping onto the broken porch. Her hand reached for the doorknob, and in an instant, she was gone. James blinked, his heart lurching. 1 second she was there, and the next, the porch was empty. The door remained shut. The clearing was silent. He stared, his mind reeling. What the hell? Throwing the car into park, he scrambled out, his breath visible in the cold night air. "Emily?" he called, his voice echoing through the woods. No answer. He rushed to the porch, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. The boards creaked under his weight as he climbed the steps. The door loomed before him, its paint cracked and faded. With trembling hands, he reached for the knob and pushed. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, dusty interior. Cobwebs hung in the corners. The air smelled of mildew and rot. The furniture was covered in white sheets, yellowed with age. It was clear no one had lived there in decades. "Emily," he whispered, his voice breaking. Silence. James stepped inside, his heart pounding. The floor groaned beneath his feet. He moved through the living room, pulling back a sheet to reveal a decayed sofa beneath. Dust filled the air with every step. He climbed the staircase slowly, each creak of the steps echoing through the empty house. At the top, he found a hallway lined with doors. One by one he opened them, A bedroom with a rusted bed frame, a bathroom with a cracked mirror, another bedroom filled with dust and shadows. But no Emily. Finally, he returned to the living room, standing in the middle of the decayed house. His breath came in short, shaky bursts. Had he imagined her? Was it all some strange dream, some trick of exhaustion and fog? And then, just as doubt began to creep in, his eyes fell on something by the fireplace. It was a photograph. Framed in tarnished silver, it sat on the mantel, coated in dust. James stepped closer, his pulse racing as he wiped the glass clean. The photo showed a family, a man, a woman, and between them, a young girl. A girl in a white dress, with long dark hair and a faint, familiar smile. Emily. James staggered back, the frame slipping from his hands and shattering on the floor. The room seemed to close in around him, the silence suffocating. He stumbled out of the house, gasping for air, his mind reeling with the impossible truth. Emily wasn't alive. She hadn't been for years. And yet, he had seen her, spoken to her, driven her here. She had been real. Hadn't she? James drove home in silence, the fog still clinging to the edges of the road like a stubborn ghost that refused to let go. His knuckles were white around the steering wheel, his mind racing in frantic circles. The image of Emily standing in that old photograph haunted him, burning itself into his brain. It hadn't just resembled her, it was her. The same face. The same faint smile. But how could that be? By the time he pulled into his driveway, dawn was breaking faintly across the horizon, painting the sky with pale strokes of gray. He killed the engine and sat there in the stillness, staring blankly out the windshield. Sleep was impossible. His thoughts screamed too loudly. Finally, he stumbled inside, collapsing onto the couch with his laptop. If there was an explanation, any explanation, it would be somewhere online. He typed shakily into the search bar, Willow Creek Ghost Stories. The results flooded in almost instantly. Local legends, strange disappearances, whispered tales of haunted roads. His eyes scanned frantically until one headline caught his breath in his throat. Tragedy at Willow Creek, 1967 car crash claims local teen's life. His hands trembled as he clicked the link. The article was old, scanned from a yellowed newspaper. The headline stretched across the top, and beneath it was a black and white photograph. Emily. Her hair was shorter, pinned back in the fashion of the time, but her eyes, the dark, sad eyes he had seen only hours ago, were unmistakable. He read feverishly. Late on the night of November 12, 1967, local high school student Emily Harper was struck and killed by a passing vehicle while walking home along Highway 9 near Willow Creek. She was just 17 years old. Emily had been attending a school dance that evening and was reportedly last seen leaving the event alone. Her family home stood just beyond the wooded road where she died. Witnesses claimed she often walked the road at night when no ride was available. Her untimely death shocked the small community. To this day, her memory lingers in local folklore. James' blood ran cold. 17. Hit by a car. On the very same road where he had picked her up. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, his chest heaving. No, he whispered. No, no, no. But the truth was undeniable. Emily Harper had died more than 50 years ago. And yet, James had seen her, heard her voice, driven her to that house. A shiver rattled down his spine as another thought clawed its way into his head. If I could see her, could she still see me? The days that followed passed in a blur. James went through the motions of work, of life, but his mind remained trapped in that night. Every sound of footsteps in the hall, every flicker of movement in his peripheral vision made his heart race. And then the dreams began. He dreamed of the woods, of that endless foggy road. He dreamed of Emily standing at the side of the road, her white dress glowing faintly in the moonlight. But in his dreams she never spoke. She only stared at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. Each night, the dreams grew sharper, more vivid. He would wake drenched in sweat, convinced that if he turned his head, he'd see her standing in the corner of his room. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He had to go back. It was a week later when James found himself once again driving toward Willow Creek. The fog greeted him like an old friend, curling along the edges of the road as if it had been waiting. The air grew colder the closer he drew to that fateful dirt path. His headlights cut through the mist as he turned down the narrow road. The trees loomed tall and oppressive, whispering in the night breeze. And then there it was, the house. Just as decayed, just as forgotten as before. James parked at the edge of the clearing and stepped out, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of gravel under his shoes. He climbed the porch once more, the boards groaning under his weight. The door stood closed as though waiting. Taking a deep breath, he pushed it open. The air inside was thick with dust, stale and heavy. His flashlight beam swept across the room, illuminating the shrouded furniture, the broken picture frames, the layers of forgotten years. He moved to the fireplace where he had seen the photograph before. The shattered glass still lay scattered across the floor. But something new caught his eye. Another photo frame. This one hadn't been there before. It sat upright on the mantel, perfectly centered, free of dust. James' pulse quickened as he stepped closer. It was a photo of him. His own face, taken just days ago. He recognized the shirt he had worn, the same tired expression he had seen in his bathroom mirror. The frame slipped from his hands, shattering against the hearth. His heart thundered in his chest. No, no. A soft sound behind him froze him in place. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. He turned, the beam of his flashlight shaking wildly across the darkened room. And there she was. Emily stood in the corner, her white dress untouched by dust or decay. Her hair fell in perfect dark waves over her shoulders, her eyes shimmering with something unreadable. James stumbled back, his voice breaking. "You're..." Her voice cut through him, soft yet echoing as though carried by the walls themselves. "You promised." James shook his head violently. "No, this isn't real. You're not, you can't be." Her expression darkened, sorrow bleeding into something colder. "You promised you wouldn't forget me." His breath came in ragged gasps. "I didn't forget. I couldn't." She stepped forward, her presence filling the room, the air growing icy. "Then why did you leave me?" James backed into the wall, his flashlight slipping from his grasp. Darkness swallowed the room, save for the pale glow that seemed to radiate from her. I didn't know," he stammered. Her eyes locked onto his, endless pools of grief and longing. "Now you do." The words reverberated through him, shaking him to his core. And in that moment, James understood. She didn't just want to be remembered. She wanted to be kept. He fled the house, stumbling into the night air, gasping for breath. The woods seemed alive around him, the fog curling tighter, choking him. He scrambled into his car, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he tore down the gravel path, branches scraping against the sides of the vehicle. But no matter how fast he drove, the fog stayed with him, clinging to the car, pressing against the windows. And then, her reflection appeared in the rearview mirror. Emily, sitting silently in the back seat, her eyes locked onto his. James screamed, swerving violently, the car skidding across the road. When he dared to look again, she was gone. But her voice lingered, soft as a breath against his ear. "You promised." James never drove down Highway 9 again. He avoided Willow Creek, avoided any mention of Emily Harper. But no matter how far he tried to run, he couldn't escape her. Because every night, when the fog rolled in and the world grew quiet, he could still hear her whisper. And every morning, when he looked into the mirror, he half expected to see her standing behind him, waiting. James had tried everything. He'd burned the newspaper article. He'd deleted every search result from his laptop. He'd buried himself in work, in routine, in anything that could distract him from the truth. But no matter what he did, Emily followed. The whispers in the dead of night. The faint smell of old perfume in empty rooms. The cold chill that crept over him when he was alone. And then, the phone calls began. At first, he thought they were pranks, dead air on the other end, just silence. But the longer they went on, the more he recognized the faint sound of breathing. Until one night when he answered and heard a voice. So familiar. "Why did you leave me, James?" The phone slipped from his trembling hand, crashing to the floor. The following evening, James found himself once again behind the wheel of his car, headlights cutting through the thickening fog. He hadn't meant to drive there. He hadn't chosen to. It was as if his body moved without his consent, as though the road itself had taken control. And soon, there it was again, the stretch of Highway 9 where it had all begun. The place where he had seen her. The place where she had entered his life. He gripped the steering wheel until his hands ached, whispering to himself, "Don't stop. Don't look. Just drive." But as the road curved through the dense forest, his headlights fell on a figure. A girl. Standing at the side of the road, her white dress glowing faintly in the mist. His heart plummeted into his stomach. Emily. Her arm lifted slowly, her thumb extended in that familiar gesture. The same gesture she had made that first night. Every muscle in his body screamed to drive past, to keep going, to escape. But his foot slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt, tires spitting gravel. The girl tilted her head, her eyes shimmering with sorrow, and something darker. James sat frozen, his chest heaving. No, not again. But the passenger door creaked open anyway. And Emily slid into the seat beside him. Her dress was damp with fog, her skin pale as moonlight. She turned to him slowly, her lips curling into the faintest smile. "You came back for me." James' throat went dry. He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Emily leaned closer, her voice a whisper that burrowed deep into his chest. "This time, don't leave me." The car filled with an unnatural cold. James' breath fogged in the air, his hands trembling violently. He forced the words out, his voice breaking. What do you want from me?" Her eyes locked onto his, endless and unblinking. "I want you to remember." And then she vanished. One moment she was there, and the next, the seat was empty, the door closed tight. James gasped, his knuckles white around the wheel. His heart hammered so loudly he thought it would burst from his chest. But when he looked into the rearview mirror, his blood froze. Emily sat in the back seat. Closer this time. Her eyes reflected the glow of the headlights, her hands folded neatly in her lap. James spun in his seat, but the back seat was empty. He turned forward again, panting, only to see her face inches from his own in the mirror. Her whisper slithered through the car. "You promised." The following days blurred into madness. James stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. His reflection no longer looked like his own. Pale skin, sunken eyes, a haunted man. Everywhere he went, he felt her near. In his car. In his house. In his dreams. And then the dreams began to shift. He no longer stood on the road. He no longer watched Emily approach. Instead, he was behind the wheel. Driving. And always, there was a figure in the headlights. A girl in white. But in the dream, when the car struck her, he didn't wake up. He watched her body crumple to the pavement, her eyes staring lifelessly at him. And he heard her voice, echoing in the stillness. "You promised." James knew he was losing his mind. There was only one way to end it. He had to go back to where it began. He had to finish the drive. The fog was thicker than ever that night, swallowing the road in endless white. The woods pressed in on either side, suffocating him. His hands gripped the wheel as he whispered, "One last time. Just one last time." The radio crackled faintly, though it wasn't turned on. And through the static her voice came. "Take me home, James." He slammed the radio off, but the voice filled the car anyway, slipping through the vents, the engine, the very air itself. "Take me home." And then, she appeared. Sitting in the passenger seat, her dress pristine, her face calm. Her presence no longer chilled him. Instead, a strange warmth washed over him, a resignation he couldn't fight. "Take me home," she repeated. James nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay." He drove in silence, the fog parting just enough to show the familiar dirt path. The house loomed ahead, just as it always had, silent, waiting. James stopped the car, his heart hammering. Emily turned to him slowly, her eyes shimmering. "This is where you leave me." James shook his head desperately. "No, I can't." Her hand touched his, cold as stone. "This is where you promised." The door creaked open on its own. Emily stepped out, her white dress trailing through the fog. She turned back once, her smile soft, almost grateful. "Thank you for remembering me." And then she walked into the mist. Her figure dissolved, fading into nothing. The woods fell silent. The fog began to lift. For the first time in weeks, James felt free. The weight on his chest eased, his breath coming steady. He closed his eyes, letting the relief wash over him. But when he opened them again, Emily was in the driver's seat. Her hands on the wheel. Her eyes fixed forward. James tried to scream, but no sound came. The car lurched forward, tires spinning on gravel, and the last thing James saw was the world swallowed in fog as Emily's whisper filled the night. "You promised." The next morning, locals found the wreck of James' car along Highway 9. The vehicle had swerved violently into a tree, the front end crumpled like paper. There was no body inside. Only an old photograph, resting neatly on the passenger seat. A photograph of James, smiling beside a girl in a white dress.